There's often a moment, a strange silence in the middle of a family gathering, a tight smile from an aging parent when someone asks, "How are things really going?" Or maybe it's just the awkward pause in a waiting room when a nurse says, "We'll need to check with your insurance before we can continue." These moments, fleeting, uncomfortable, quickly brushed aside, are the small fractures in our collective facade. They reveal the truth we spend so much energy avoiding, that in America, growing old has become a burden to bear rather than a passage to honor. These moments accumulate like dust in the corners of our national conscience, unaddressed and unacknowledged, until they form a landscape of quiet desperation that we've somehow accepted as normal. Maybe it's watching your mother cry over a bill, or her hands, the same hands that once bandaged your scraped knees and applauded your small victories, now trembling as they hold a piece of paper that essentially tells her she cannot afford to be ill. The cruelly precise numbers spelling out the cost of simply continuing to exist. Maybe it's hearing your father whisper that he's skipping medication to make it to the end of the month. A man who never missed a day of work, who taught you about responsibility and planning ahead, now forced into dangerous gambles with his own health, because the system he paid into for decades has left him with impossible choices. Or maybe it's simply driving past another run-down elder care facility with a bright, cheery name that somehow makes it feel even worse. Golden Sunset Acres, or Peaceful Harbor, painted in cheerful letters above entrances that lead to fluorescent-lit hallways, where the scent of industrial cleaner fails to mask more human smells, where staff rush between rooms with too little time and too little pay to provide the care that marketing brochures promise. Elder care. That phrase hits hard, doesn't it? Two simple words that carry the weight of our collective failures, our misplaced priorities, our unwillingness to look directly at what awaits us all. It's a phrase that should evoke compassion, respect, and thoughtful planning. Instead, it often triggers anxiety, guilt, and a desire to change the subject. It's a mirror held up to who we are as a society, what we prioritize, what we ignore, and who we quietly push aside. The reflection isn't flattering, but it's one we need to face, because how we treat our most vulnerable citizens, those who built the world we now inhabit, speaks volumes about who we truly are beneath our proclamations of greatness. We're taught to see aging as a problem to be managed, not a chapter to be respected. We speak of the burden of an aging population as if longevity were some kind of national threat rather than a testament to medical progress. We talk about elder care solutions with the same detached efficiency we might use to discuss waste management or traffic control, technical problems requiring technical fixes, not human lives requiring human connection. And nowhere is that more obvious than in the way America treats its older citizens. We warehouse them in facilities designed for efficiency rather than comfort. We medicate them into compliance when their needs become too demanding. We force their families into financial ruin to provide even basic care. And perhaps most cruelly, we make them feel like they should apologize for needing help at all. We pretend we're the standard. We wave our flags and tout our exceptional status. We lecture other nations about human rights and quality of life. We tell ourselves comforting stories about American ingenuity and compassion. We pretend we lead the world in opportunity, in comfort, in human dignity. Our politicians speak of the greatest healthcare system in the world, while families go bankrupt paying for insulin. They praise American family values, while those same families are torn apart by the impossible mathematics of elder care, calculating whether they can afford to quit their jobs to care for parents or whether a nursing home might be the only option, however heartbreaking. But when it comes to aging, when it comes to how we care for our elders, other countries are running laps around us. They're not just marginally better, they're operating in an entirely different paradigm, one where elder care isn't a crisis to be managed, but a natural extension of social responsibility. So let's drop the myth. Let's abandon, just for a moment, our reflexive insistence that America does everything best. Let's look honestly at what other nations have built while we were busy constructing a healthcare system that serves shareholders first and patients second, or third or fourth. Let's look at 4 countries that treat their elders not as burdens, but as living libraries, as community anchors, as people who still matter. Countries where growing old doesn't mean facing financial ruin, where families aren't forced to choose between their parents' care and their children's futures, where dignity isn't a luxury good available only to those who can afford it. And let's ask the uncomfortable question, why are they winning while we're falling apart? Let's start with Japan, a country where aging doesn't mean disappearing. It means rising into a new role in society. A nation that has embraced its demographic destiny rather than fighting against it, that has recognized the wisdom in silver hair rather than trying to cover it up or push it aside. In the US, growing old often feels like a slow fade into irrelevance. We joke about becoming invisible after 50, about being overlooked in meetings, about the way young people's eyes slide past us in public spaces. We speak about retirement as an ending rather than a transition, the finish line of productivity after which society has little use for us. But in Japan, aging means wisdom, authority, community respect. The concept of koreisha carries none of the dismissive undertones of our senior citizen. It speaks instead of earned status, a valuable perspective, of a natural place in the social order that doesn't diminish with physical changes, but rather evolves into something new and equally valuable. In rural towns and bustling cities alike, elders are not pushed to the margins. They are the margins. They define the boundaries of acceptable behavior. They carry cultural knowledge. They represent continuity in a rapidly changing world. They're seen as the holders of history, the guides to younger generations. Their presence in public spaces isn't tolerated. It's expected and welcomed. The government doesn't just tolerate its aging population, it actively designs for them. Universal healthcare isn't controversial. It's considered basic infrastructure, like roads or electricity. Long-term care insurance is mandatory, spreading the cost of aging across society rather than placing it solely on the shoulders of individuals and their immediate families. Public spaces are walkable, transportation is senior-friendly, and healthcare is accessible, affordable, and deeply integrated. The needs of older citizens aren't an afterthought or a special accommodation. They're woven into the fundamental design of social systems, urban planning, and community life. More than 1 in 4 people in Japan are over 65. This demographic reality, similar to what America faces, could have prompted panic or resentment. Instead, it has inspired adaptation. And rather than panicking, the country has shifted its economy, its policies, and its culture to support them. Robotics research focuses heavily on assistive technologies. Architecture incorporates principles of accessibility not as reluctant compliance but as thoughtful inclusion. There's even a national holiday, Respect for the Aged Day. Communities gather to honor their oldest members. Schools organize programs where children learn from elders' experiences. Gift-giving traditions recognize the contributions of those who came before. It's not a PR stunt, it's a reflection of a deeper truth. Growing old is something to be celebrated, not feared. This approach isn't without challenges. No system is perfect. But underneath Japan's elder care infrastructure lies something more fundamental than policies or programs. A cultural understanding that we are all connected across generations, that the young will become the old, that care given now will eventually return in kind. You see, Japan understands what we've forgotten, that elder care isn't just about taking care of people, it's about acknowledging their worth. That efficiency without compassion is merely warehousing. That a society is measured not by how it treats its most powerful members, but by how it treats those who need support, designing a system that works for humans, not just budgets. Then there's Sweden, a country where social safety net isn't a buzzword, it's a promise, where the needs of an aging population aren't treated as a surprise crisis, but as an expected, plannable phase of collective life. Where the question isn't, can we afford to care for our elders, but rather, how can we design care that preserves dignity while meeting needs? In America, elder care often falls through the cracks, left to overwhelmed families, underpaid aides, and private facilities more interested in profit than compassion. We've created a patchwork system where quality of care depends largely on personal wealth, where navigating available services requires the skills of a detective and the patience of a saint, where those who cared for us may find themselves receiving far less care than they deserve. But in Sweden, it's built into the system, not as an afterthought or an emergency response, but as a fundamental component of the social contract, as basic and expected as education for children or infrastructure for communities. From the moment someone starts to age, the country steps in, not to take over, but to support, not with begrudging minimal assistance, but with the understanding that maintaining independence and dignity requires resources and planning. Not treating elder care as charity, but as a return on the lifetime of contributions each person has made to society. There's universal health care that actually covers what people need, not just emergency interventions, but the ongoing chronic conditions that accompany aging. There are generous pensions that don't require shameful paperwork or proving one's destitution, and a culture that expects the state to ensure quality of life, not just basic survival. Most elderly Swedes live independently, but they are never left alone. They remain in their homes, in their neighborhoods, surrounded by familiar faces and routines for as long as possible. The system doesn't wait for crisis. It anticipates needs and addresses them proactively. Care workers make regular visits. They're not rushed contractors trying to fit too many clients into too few hours. They are professionals with training, decent wages, and enough time to provide genuine connection along with practical assistance. Meals are delivered, not bland institutional food, but nourishing meals that respect preferences and dietary needs. The kind of food that acknowledges eating as both a physical necessity and a source of pleasure that shouldn't disappear with age. Services are coordinated, not through endless phone calls or confusing websites, but as a matter of course. The burden of orchestrating care doesn't fall on adult children already juggling their own responsibilities or on elders who may be dealing with cognitive changes. It's simply part of what the system provides. And when full-time care is needed, the facilities aren't warehouses. They're not sterile, fluorescent-lit institutions where privacy is a luxury and personal choice an afterthought. They're modern, clean, respectful environments where human dignity isn't optional. It's built into the architecture, where rooms feel like homes, not hospital wards, where staff ratios allow for conversation, not just perfunctory physical care. What's wild is that Sweden spends less per capita on elder care than the US, but gets far better results. This isn't magic or some cultural quirk that can't be replicated. It's simply the difference between a system designed primarily for human well-being and one designed primarily for profit extraction. Because they're not bleeding money through administrative bloat or private insurance middlemen. They invest upfront in preventative care and support systems that keep people healthier longer. They recognize that social connection is as vital to health as medication. They understand that a system that treats elders well also treats families well, allowing adult children to remain productive members of the workforce rather than being forced to choose between career and caregiving. And the return? Longer lives, happier aging, less fear. A society where growing old isn't a nightmare scenario but simply another phase of life, with its own challenges and its own joys, both acknowledged and addressed with equal attention. Let's talk about Costa Rica. Not a wealthy Nordic nation with centuries of social democracy behind it. Not an economic powerhouse with bleeding-edge technology. Just a small country that somehow manages to treat its aging citizens with a grace and effectiveness that puts our superpower status to shame. A country that quietly outperforms the US in one of the most important measures of aging, life expectancy. Where elders don't just survive longer, they thrive longer. Where the golden years actually contain some gold, rather than being tarnished by isolation, poverty, and declining health. Despite being a fraction of our size and budget, Costa Rica's elders live longer, healthier lives, not because they have more money, but because they have more support. Not because they have access to experimental treatments or luxury care facilities, but because they remain woven into the fabric of daily life, valued for their presence rather than shuffled aside. Costa Rica has a universal public healthcare system known as La Caja, which covers everyone, including older citizens, without astronomical bills or endless red tape. Prevention is emphasized over treatment. Community clinics bring care closer to people rather than forcing lengthy journeys. Doctors still make house calls for those who can't easily travel. The system isn't perfect, but its priorities are clear. People matter more than profits. And unlike in the US, where social connection tends to fracture as people age, where retirement can mean a sudden loss of daily interaction, where families are often geographically scattered, where the elderly frequently report crushing loneliness, Costa Rica's elders remain embedded in family and community life. Multi-generational households are common, not out of economic necessity, though that plays a role, but from a genuine belief that families belong together, that grandparents and grandchildren have much to offer each other, that care flows most naturally within the context of ongoing relationships rather than being outsourced to strangers. Social engagement is expected. Older people aren't just tolerated in public spaces, they're active participants. They sit in town squares playing chess or dominoes. They attend community events. They're consulted on local matters. Their presence isn't seen as a sign of having nowhere else to go, but as a natural expression of belonging. Elders walk. They talk. They contribute. The concept of pura vida, Costa Rica's national philosophy of embracing simple pleasures and not rushing through life, extends to how aging is approached. There's less emphasis on maintaining youthful appearance or productivity and more on finding satisfaction in each day as it comes. In fact, parts of Costa Rica belong to the blue zones, regions of the world where people live significantly longer, healthier lives than average. Places where centenarians aren't rarities, but common sights. And one of the biggest reasons? How they treat their elders, the social connections, the continued sense of purpose, the lack of stress about healthcare costs or becoming a burden. There's a rhythm to life in Costa Rica that values presence over productivity. That allows aging to be natural, supported, and honored. That recognizes the transitions of life, without trying to deny them or hide them away. That understands we are all temporary inhabitants of these bodies, and that how we care for each other in our vulnerability defines us, more than how we celebrate each other in our strength. And here's the kicker. Costa Rica does it without being a global superpower, without having the world's largest economy, without technological advantages or abundant natural resources or any of the other excuses we use to explain away America's failures in this realm. Because apparently treating people well doesn't require being rich. It requires deciding to. It requires prioritizing human dignity over profit margins. It requires recognizing that we are all aging from the moment we're born, and that creating systems that honor that journey benefits everyone, not just those currently in their later years. Last but not least, Portugal. A country that has become a rising haven for retirees from around the world, including a growing number of Americans who are tired of being ignored at home. A nation that has turned its relatively modest resources into a system that provides not luxury, but something far more valuable, peace of mind. Portugal doesn't just offer sunshine and wine, though both are abundant and appreciated. It offers something far more valuable. Dignity, the simple ability to grow older without constantly calculating costs, without fear of bankruptcy from a single health event, without becoming isolated as care needs increase. Healthcare in Portugal is not only affordable, it's respected. The National Health Service isn't seen as charity for the poor, but as a basic right for all citizens. Quality varies by region, as it does everywhere, but the fundamental philosophy remains. Care should be accessible regardless of economic status. Doctors make house calls. Not as an expensive concierge service for the wealthy, but as a standard practice for those with mobility issues. The relationship between patient and physician isn't rushed and transactional, but ongoing and personal. Preventative care isn't a luxury, but a foundation. Medications are subsidized. Pensioners don't face the cruel choice between food and prescriptions. The system recognizes that consistency in treatment leads to better outcomes and lower costs in the long run, rather than forcing people into emergency care when they can't afford ongoing management. Wait times exist, yes, but they're not life-threatening or financially ruinous. The system prioritizes based on medical need rather than ability to pay. And for those who can afford it, private options exist alongside public ones, creating a tiered system, certainly, but one with a meaningful floor rather than a trapdoor. Housing is modest but stable. Many Portuguese elders own their homes outright, providing security that American seniors often lack as property taxes rise and fixed incomes shrink. Those who rent benefit from stronger tenant protections than exist in many U.S. states. And while nursing facilities exist for those who need them, they're viewed as a last resort rather than an expected final destination. Community life is vibrant. Towns and neighborhoods are designed for walking, not driving, allowing older residents to maintain independence even after giving up cars. Cafes and public squares provide natural gathering spaces where intergenerational mixing happens organically. Religious institutions, regardless of one's personal faith, often serve as social hubs that check on and care for older members. And there is time. Time to talk, to walk, to connect. The Portuguese pace of life doesn't worship efficiency above all else. Meals aren't rushed. Conversations aren't cut short. The afternoon pause still exists in many places. This rhythm naturally accommodates the sometimes slower pace of aging bodies without making them feel like obstacles to productivity. In the U.S., time feels like a luxury reserved for the wealthy. We rush our elders through medical appointments, hurry care workers from task to task, squeeze family visits into hectic schedules, and generally treat attention as a resource too precious to waste on those no longer in their productive prime. But in Portugal, time is a right. Not an infinite resource, certainly, but one that should be distributed more evenly across the lifespan rather than concentrated in youth and working years. Retirees don't just survive, they thrive. They feel useful, integrated. They are not a problem to solve. They are part of the solution. They babysit grandchildren. They maintain community traditions. They pass down skills and stories. Their value doesn't end when their earning potential does. Portugal's elder care system isn't perfect. Rural areas face challenges different from urban centers. Economic pressures create tensions. Political shifts threaten certain programs. But it's grounded in a radical idea that the final decades of your life should not be a financial minefield. They should be livable and even joyful. These countries, Japan, Sweden, Costa Rica, Portugal, are not fantasy lands. They are not utopias where all problems have been solved or where aging occurs without any challenges. They have problems, budgets, political friction, difficult decisions about resource allocation. But they've made a clear choice to treat their elders not as afterthoughts but as priorities, not as financial drains but as valuable community members, not as problems to be warehoused but as people deserving of care, connection, and continued respect. They're not winning because they're richer. In fact, 3 of the 4 have significantly smaller economies than the United States. They're winning because they're wiser, because they've recognized that how we treat our most vulnerable reveals who we truly are, because they understand that systems designed for human dignity may sometimes be less efficient but are ultimately more effective at creating societies where people actually want to live at every age. Meanwhile, in the US, we keep pretending that aging is someone else's problem. We act surprised when nursing homes fail inspections, when elder poverty rises, when families buckle under caregiving responsibilities. We express momentary outrage at scandals and then return to business as usual. We privatize the pain. We tell families that caring for aging parents is their responsibility alone, emotionally, physically, financially, while simultaneously creating an economic system that makes such care nearly impossible without sacrifice and suffering. We normalize the neglect. We accept as inevitable the loneliness, the substandard care, the financial devastation that accompanies aging for so many Americans. We shrug off the reality that dental care, vision care, and hearing aids, all crucial to quality of life, remain luxury items even under Medicare. We let corporations set the rules and then act shocked when older Americans are left behind. We allow insurance companies to determine what care is necessary, pharmaceutical companies to set medication prices, and private equity firms to extract profit from nursing facilities while cutting staff and services. But here's the thing. Aging isn't a niche issue. It's not a special interest concern or a problem affecting only a small segment of society. It's universal. If we're lucky, we'll all get there. Each of us will someday hope for systems that treat us with kindness rather than contempt, that see our continued humanity rather than just our increasing needs. And how we treat our elders now is a preview of how we'll be treated later. The systems we build, the priorities we set, the values we demonstrate, these don't just affect today's seniors, but tomorrow's as well, including ourselves. These 4 countries don't just offer better elder care, they offer us a mirror, a warning, and maybe a path forward. They show us not just what we're doing wrong, but what doing right might actually look like. They demonstrate that alternatives exist, not in theory but in practice, not in some distant future but in our present world. So the question isn't just, why are they winning? It's why are we okay losing? Why do we accept as inevitable what other nations have proven is changeable? Why do we continue to place profit above dignity, efficiency above compassion, youth above experience? And maybe more urgently, how much longer can we afford to pretend we're not? How many more parents will cry over medical bills? How many more families will be torn apart by impossible caregiving demands? How many more elders will die alone, wondering what became of the society they helped build? Because there's often a moment when we can no longer look away from what we've created. And perhaps that moment is now.